This is TLC to go.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that could really, step up your teaching game. Gamification in health sciences education.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll be talking about using game elements to make learning more engaging.
Yeah.
And hopefully more effective for your students.
Right.
And we're diving deep today into a resource from the UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center on gamification.
Okay.
And it's actually got some pretty interesting insights.
It is. One of the things that I find really interesting about this is, gamification, people think, oh, you're just adding fun and games to your classroom. But it's actually grounded in some solid learning theory.
Right.
When you think about it, games are motivating, right?
Yeah.
They give you that constant feedback. You have a sense of progress. You have chances to work together and compete. And all those things can be incredibly powerful when you're thinking about learning.
Right.
Especially in a field, as demanding as health sciences.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's easy to dismiss gamification. It's just trying to make things more fun. But it goes deeper than that. So let's dig into the why behind gamification in health sciences education. The source material starts by asking, why consider this strategy? And I think that's a question a lot of faculty are probably asking themselves.
Right. One of the biggest reasons is because it can have a significant impact on student learning, student motivation, even student behavior. And you think about that in health sciences, where we're dealing with real lives.
Well, absolutely.
That's absolutely critical, right? We need our students to be not just knowledgeable, but also engaged and driven to succeed.
For sure. So that makes a lot of sense. But what does that actually look like in terms of learning outcomes?
Well, research has shown that gamification can actually lead to improvements in cognitive learning outcomes. So that means students are actually retaining information better, developing those critical thinking skills they'll need in practice. It can also boost motivational outcomes, increasing student engagement and interest in the material. And finally, it can positively impact behavioral outcomes.
Oh, wow.
So you see things like participation, collaboration, even time management.
Okay, so it's not just about making learning fun. We're talking about actually improving how students learn and apply their knowledge. I think some faculty might be wondering how this all connects to the real world of health sciences. Yeah. We're not just teaching students to play games.
Right.
We're preparing them for careers where, lives are at stake.
And that's where it gets really interesting because, think about a medical student who's struggling to apply theoretical knowledge of pharmacology to real life patient cases. By gamifying that learning experience. Perhaps through a virtual patient simulation, you can create a safe and engaging environment for them to practice decision-making, analyze data, see the consequences of their choices.
Okay.
And this type of active learning driven by gamification can really help bridge that gap between theory and practice and, lead to a better prepared healthcare professional, more confident healthcare professional.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic example.
Yeah.
It really highlights how gamification can address, these very specific challenges we face in health sciences education. So it's not about these abstract learning outcomes.
Right.
It's about, giving these students the skills and the confidence they need to succeed in real-world healthcare settings. So we've established the why. Gamification has the potential to significantly impact how our students learn and prepare for their careers.
For sure.
But now let's move on to the how. The source provides some really practical teaching tips for incorporating gamification into courses.
Yeah, and one of the key takeaways from the resource is this importance of aligning the gamification with your course goals. It's not about throwing in some random game elements just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
You really have to be strategic and intentional about how you're using the gamification to enhance the learning.
That makes a lot of sense. You don't want to be creating distractions or making things overly complicated. So how can faculty make sure that the gamification elements they choose are actually supporting their teaching objectives?
Well, let's dive into some of those specific teaching tips outlined in the resource.
Right.
And remember, these are just a starting point. You can adapt and modify them to fit your specific course, your teaching style.
Okay, so let's get into those teaching tips. The resource mentions starting small as a key strategy. And I think that's really encouraging for faculty who, maybe feel a little overwhelmed by the idea of gamifying their entire course.
Absolutely, you don't have to like transform everything overnight.
Right. Just identify one learning objective or maybe a topic that students typically struggle with and brainstorm how you could incorporate just one or two game elements to enhance that area.
That's a relief to hear. It makes it seem a lot more approachable. So what are some specific game elements that faculty could consider?
Well, the resource highlights a number of them, but one that really stands out to me is this idea of continuous feedback.
Okay.
In games, players are constantly getting information about how you're doing, what they're getting right, where they need to improve, how to adjust their strategies. And we can apply that same principle in the classroom.
So instead of just giving students feedback at, the midterm or on major assignments, we're providing more like frequent low-stakes opportunities for them to kind of check their understanding and make adjustments as they go.
Exactly. So think about integrating like quizzes or polls, even quick simulations into your lectures or online modules.
These activities, they not only provide the students with that immediate feedback, but also allow you as the instructor to kind of gauge their understanding and adjust your teaching accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. Keeps students engaged and keeps them on track.
Yeah.
It reminds me of those online learning platforms.
Right.
Where you get like immediate feedback after each question and you can see your progress.
Yeah.
As you move through the module. Very motivating.
Very motivating. And speaking of motivation, another tip from the resource is to consider incorporating what they call game fiction or narrative elements into your activities.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm intrigued, but I'm also a little skeptical.
Yeah.
How do we incorporate, storytelling into something as complex as, let's say, teaching about the cardiovascular system?
Right.
Wouldn't that oversimplify things?
Well, it's all about finding the right balance. You don't have to turn your lectures into like epic sagas or anything like that.
Right.
But instead, think about just introducing like a storyline or a challenge or even a thematic framework to make the learning experience more engaging, more memorable. So, for instance, instead of just presenting, the anatomy of the heart, you could frame it as a mystery that students need to solve.
Okay.
Where they have to use their knowledge to identify the cause of a patient's symptoms.
I see what you mean. So it's about creating a context that makes the information more relevant.
Yeah.
And engaging. Instead of just, memorizing facts, students are using their knowledge to, solve a problem.
Right.
Or uncover a solution. That's a much more active way to learn.
Much more active, much more stimulating.
Yeah.
And by weaving in those narrative elements, you can tap into students' natural curiosity and make the learning process feel more like an adventure than a chore.
Right.
And this brings us to another important consideration, and that's the balance between competition and collaboration.
This is something I've always kind of struggled with in my own teaching. On one hand, a little friendly competition, I think, can be motivating. It can push students to do their best. But I also worry about, creating too much pressure or, discouraging teamwork.
Yeah, you hit on a really key point, and that is both competition and collaboration have their place in gamified learning. But the ideal balance really depends on your specific learning objectives, the nature of your students, even the activity itself.
So how do we decide which approach to use?
Well, it's about being intentional and thoughtful about the game elements you choose and how you structure the activity.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're teaching a concept that requires students to, apply their knowledge to solve a complex problem, a collaborative team-based approach might be more effective.
Okay.
So you could set up a challenge where teams of students have to work together to diagnose a patient, develop a treatment plan, or even design a public health intervention.
Right.
This not only reinforces their content knowledge, but it also promotes those crucial teamwork and communication skills that are so essential in healthcare.
Yeah, that's a great example. It really shows how gamification can be used to create, these authentic learning experiences.
Right.
That really mirror the challenges that healthcare professionals face in the real world. But what about those situations where, maybe a little competition might be beneficial?
For sure. There are times when a competitive element can be really motivating and engaging, especially when it's focused on individual achievement,
Right.
mastery of content. So think about, using quizzes or leaderboards, even point systems to encourage students to test their knowledge and strive for their personal best.
Right.
But it's crucial to make sure that that competition is healthy and supportive.
Yeah.
You don't want it to be cutthroat or anxiety-inducing. You want to create an environment where students feel comfortable taking risks, making mistakes and learning from each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
and using competition strategically to enhance learning,
Right.
not to create, unnecessary stress
Right.
or division among students. This has been such an insightful discussion about the practical aspects of gamification. But before we move on, I want to address one question that I'm sure many faculty members have.
Sure. What's that?
I mean, this all sounds great in theory, but I think many of us are kind of wondering, where can we find the resources,
Yeah.
the support to actually implement these ideas? It's one thing to understand, the concepts, but it's another thing to actually, put them into practice.
For sure.
Especially when we're already juggling so many other responsibilities.
You're absolutely right. But luckily, there are some fantastic resources out there that can help faculty get started with gamification. And the source we've been discussing, the UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center, highlights several of those resources. Do you want to take a look at some of those?
Absolutely. Let's dive into those resources. So the source mentions a webinar by Dr. Chelsea Renfro from the UTHSC College of Pharmacy.
Okay.
And it focuses on using gamification
Yeah.
to boost student engagement. Have you had a chance to check that out?
I haven't seen that specific webinar, but, knowing Dr. Renfro's work, I'm sure it's packed with, practical advice and real-world examples.
Yeah.
And, it's great they're highlighting resources created by for faculty.
Yeah.
It makes it much more approachable.
It does. It really does.
Yeah.
It's like, having a colleague kind of walk you through the process.
Right.
Sharing their experiences and insights.
Absolutely.
What other resources are mentioned?
Well, there's a 2-part series on gamification in higher education from the University of Chicago's Academic Technology Solutions.
Okay.
I think that one could be really helpful for faculty who are, looking for a more in-depth exploration of gamification, maybe even some inspiration for how to apply it in different ways.
Yeah. And for those who really want to get into, the nitty-gritty of game design, there's a resource from the Teaching and Learning Educational Technology Department. And it really goes deep into, the definitions, mechanics, examples of gamification.
Wow.
I imagine that could be a valuable resource for, brainstorming
Right.
specific game elements to use in your teaching.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in the research behind gamification, they even mention a 2021 article by Van Galen et al. That gives a really comprehensive overview of gamification in health professions education.
Okay.
So, there are resources out there for all levels,
Yeah.
whether you're just starting out or looking to really deepen your understanding
Right.
of the research and the theory behind it.
It's fantastic that there's so much support available.
Yeah.
I think, this really highlights that gamification isn't just some passing fad.
No.
It's, it's a growing movement in education, and there's a real community
Absolutely.
of educators who are passionate about exploring its potential.
I completely agree. And the great thing about this community is that it's all about sharing and collaboration.
Right.
There are countless online forums, blogs, social media groups where educators are sharing their ideas, experiences, even ready-made gamified activities that you can adapt for your own courses.
That's so encouraging. It really takes the pressure off.
It does.
Of having to create everything from scratch.
Right.
Knowing that there's this network of support out there
Exactly.
can make the whole process much less daunting.
For sure.
So we've talked about the why, the how, and the where to find support.
Right.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the most important message is that, gamification is more than just a fun way to kind of spice up your teaching.
Right.
It's a really powerful tool that can truly transform how our students learn and prepare for their future careers in healthcare.
Yeah.
It's about making learning more engaging, yes, but also more effective,
Right.
more relevant,
For sure.
and ultimately more meaningful.
I think that's a perfect way to sum it up. We've seen how gamification can lead to better cognitive learning outcomes, increased student motivation,
Absolutely.
and the development of essential soft skills like teamwork and communication.
Right.
And the best part is you don't have to be like a tech expert or a game designer to get started.
Exactly. Start small.
Yeah.
Focus on one area you want to enhance in your teaching.
Right.
experiment with different game elements,
Yeah.
and just see what works for you and your students.
And don't be afraid to reach out for support.
Yeah.
There are so many resources available,
Oh, okay.
both within your institution and online.
For sure.
Connect with other educators who are exploring gamification,
Right.
share your experiences, and learn from each other.
I love that.
This whole deep dive has been about giving you the knowledge and the inspiration to, take that first step.
Absolutely.
Now it's your turn to put these ideas into action. What's one small change you can make in your teaching this week to incorporate, an element of gamification?
Yeah, think about that.
Maybe it's adding a simple point system to your quizzes,
Right.
turning a review session into a quick game show,
I love it.
or introducing a storyline that runs through your lectures.
Yeah. Whatever you choose, just remember to have fun with it.
Yeah.
Gamification is about bringing a sense of play and joy back into the learning process for both you and your students.
I love that.
Yeah.
So keep learning, keep playing,
Keep playing.
and keep pushing the boundaries
Absolutely.
of what's possible in health sciences education.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into gamification.